The sun blazed down on a modest stadium nestled in the heart of Enugu, where plastic chairs groaned beneath the weight of families dressed in their Sunday best. Laughter and camera flashes filled the air. At the edge of a crowded row, a man in a threadbare shirt and cracked shoes clutched a torn plastic folder tightly to his chest. Victor Ez, 49, sat quietly, shoulders stiff, eyes darting across the sea of faces. The faded folder in his grip was the only invitation he received, bent at the edges, smudged by his sweaty palms, but sacred. It was his son's graduation day, and though he'd just come from a long night cleaning offices, sleep-deprived and aching, nothing would keep him from witnessing this moment. Around him, parents murmured, posed for selfies, waved at their children on stage, but Victor sat still, shifting every now and then to relieve the soreness in his back. Every breath a silent prayer of gratitude and disbelief. From the stage, a booming voice echoed through the speakers as names were called. One by one, fresh graduates stepped up, receiving certificates to proud applause. Victor leaned forward every time the engineering faculty was announced, his fingers tightening around the folder. Then it came, like thunder wrapped in music. Valentine Ez, graduating with honors in engineering. The crowd roared. Some clapped absently, unaware of the story behind the name. But Victor's face broke into a soft, almost disbelieving smile. He clapped too, lightly, eyes misting. His son, his only child, was finally here, wearing a black gown with a bright blue sash. Valentine stepped up toward the podium with quiet confidence. He shook hands, then did something unexpected. He didn't collect the certificate right away. Instead, he asked for the mic. The crowd hushed, confused. Valentine's voice rang out, calm but emotional. "Before I collect this certificate, there's someone here who deserves to be honored first." He looked straight into the crowd, straight at Victor. The stadium turned, hundreds of eyes following the line of his gaze until they landed on the humble man in the faded shirt, sitting stiffly in the third row. "Dad, please come up here." Gasps, whispers. Victor froze, stunned. This wasn't in the program. His hands trembled, the folder slipping onto the floor. For a long moment, he didn't move, unsure if he was dreaming, if his tired ears had misheard. Then, slowly, like someone stepping onto sacred ground, he rose. What Valentine did next would leave the entire stadium in stunned silence. Cut to black, a pause. Then the narrator's voice, soft, certain, carrying the weight of a story, untold. To understand this moment, you need to know what came before it. Victor Ez was a man built from sacrifice. Once a promising final year accounting student at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, his life took an unexpected turn when his girlfriend, Nkechi, became pregnant. During their final year, the news was met with scorn and rejection from her wealthy family, who labeled Victor as unworthy, a liability with no pedigree. His own parents, deeply conservative and bitterly disappointed, withdrew their support. Alone and cornered by duty, Victor dropped out of school, abandoning dreams of white-collar success to raise a child on his own. Nkechi disappeared shortly after childbirth, leaving behind a baby boy and a silence Victor would never fill. With no degree and no safety net, he began stringing together menial jobs just to survive. One week he might work as a security guard by day and a car wash attendant by afternoon, then load buses or mop commercial floors by night. There were months when he averaged only 3 or 4 hours of sleep per day, dragging his aching body across Enugu's underbellies just to afford food, rent, and school fees. His son, Valentine, grew up seeing his father in perpetual motion, always tired, always working, always kind. From the age of 7, Valentine started noticing the cracks, how his father's fingers were permanently calloused, how his shoes flapped with every step, how they never celebrated birthdays or holidays like other families. There was never cake, never gifts, just quiet dinners with a single candle and a whispered prayer. When Valentine asked why they didn't have nice things, Victor would gently pat his head and say, "We can't afford everything, but I'll give you what matters. Your future." They never had a television or fancy gadgets, but they had an old transistor radio, textbooks Victor scavenged from second-hand stalls, and evening math lessons by candlelight. Their bond was forged in scarcity, but held together by fierce love. Yet it wasn't always easy. Valentine, though gentle and intelligent, wrestled with a deep shame. He hated how other kids whispered when his father dropped him off in worn clothes, smelling of flawed disinfectant. He hated being the only child without birthday stories, the one with patched uniforms and a lunchbox that had belonged to someone else first. He remembered one day in primary 6 when a classmate pinched his nose and laughed. "Your Papa Day smelled like mop." Valentine came home angry, crying and silent. That night, Victor didn't scold him. He just wrapped his arms around his son and said, "One day, you'll see why I never quit." Victor kept that vow like scripture. Every job, every insult, every sleepless night was endured for one reason, so that Valentine could walk across a stage someday, certificate in hand, free from the curse of interrupted dreams. And even though Valentine struggled with the weight of that legacy, the burden of his father's suffering, he also carried it like armor. He studied harder, avoided trouble, kept to himself. Slowly, painfully, he climbed. Through secondary school, he never ranked below 3rd in his class, a quiet storm of intelligence and resilience. At 16, he passed WAEC and JAMB in one sitting. At 17, he gained admission into the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, the same campus his father had abandoned 2 decades earlier. The same dream, this time passed down like a burning torch. Throughout Valentine's university years, Victor never let up. He continued cleaning banks at night, sometimes lying and saying he was fine, even when he fell sick from exhaustion. He never missed a tuition payment, never missed a call, never missed a prayer. Valentine, now 22, was standing on the brink of everything his father had bled for. He had become a man molded not just by books, but by watching a father hold the world together with his bare hands. Their journey had been forged in hardship, but it was paved with quiet determination. Now, at this moment of achievement, standing under the blistering sun of graduation day, the memory of every skipped meal, every sleepless night, every insult Victor endured hung in the air like incense. Because this wasn't just Valentine's Day, it was their day, and it was long overdue. Valentine's admission into the University of Lagos to study engineering was supposed to be the crowning reward of years of sacrifice. It was Victor's dream realized, a beacon in their long tunnel of struggle. But reality wasted no time in unraveling the illusion. School fees were just the beginning. There were textbooks priced like gold, lab materials, transportation costs, endless deep dues. Every semester came with a new financial mountain to scale. Victor, already working 3 jobs, took on a 4th, sweeping the showroom floors of a luxury car dealership from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. He came home with his shirt clinging to his skin, his knees stiff, his lungs rattling with an increasing cough. But he never complained. To Valentine, he simply smiled and said, "We're almost there, my son. Just keep going." He didn't say that sometimes the cough made him see stars, or that his legs gave out once in the dealership bathroom and he had to crawl to his mopped on campus. Meanwhile, a new world opened before Valentine. He was surrounded by boys who drove sleek cars, wore designer shoes, and partied on rooftops. They talked about vacations in Dubai, private tutors, and connections that guaranteed internships. They seemed so confident, so free, untouched by the burdens he carried. Slowly, without meaning to, A silent resentment crept in, not toward his father directly, but toward the life he came from, the life that made him feel invisible, small, less than. He began skipping his father's calls, responding with curt messages. He stopped telling him about campus events or inviting him for departmental meetings. He said it was because he was busy. In truth, he was ashamed. Then one Saturday afternoon, while Valentine was lounging near the Faculty of Engineering with classmates, Victor appeared. He'd travelled from Ajangbodi with a flask of warm rice and stew, hoping to surprise his son. He wore his night shift uniform, a faded blue jumpsuit with his name stitched across the chest, dust still on his sleeves. His face lit up when he spotted Valentine across the lawn, but before he could call out, a girl beside Valentine glanced over and chuckled. "That your driver?" The question stabbed like glass. Valentine, startled, forced a quick laugh. "Yeah, he's just our helper. He brings stuff sometimes." Victor heard it, not just the words, but the cold distance in his son's voice. He stopped in his tracks, said nothing. His eyes lingered on Valentine for a second longer than usual, then lowered. That evening, in Valentine's hostile corridor, Victor handed over the flask silently. He didn't ask to come in, didn't ask why. When Valentine mumbled thanks and turned away quickly, Victor just nodded, holding his tired body upright with visible effort. Then, without another word, he turned and walked down the hallway, his worn-out shoes scraping softly against the tiles. That night, alone in his tiny room, he unpacked the flask he'd brought back. Still full, still warm. He placed it carefully in the fridge beside a loaf of bread. Then, without a word, he folded his uniform, coughed into the dark, and tried to sleep. In the months that followed the incident on campus, a quiet distance grew between Victor and Valentine. Their once frequent calls faded into brief, transactional messages. Victor no longer visited unannounced. He simply continued to work, doubling shifts, taking on extra cleaning contracts, and sending money like clockwork. He never mentioned what he heard that day, never brought it up. But something had dimmed in his eyes, a light that once danced with pride, now dulled by something heavier. Valentine, meanwhile, immersed himself deeper into campus life. He reinvented himself. When new friends asked about his family, he casually replied, "My dad's abroad, works in logistics," crafting a false image he could hide behind. The lie came easily, but the guilt followed, always whispering. It wasn't until a minor football match on campus that the facade cracked. Valentine took a hard fall during a casual game with classmates. He twisted his ankle badly, and after limping to the sideline, realized he couldn't stand. He called several friends. No one picked. It was late, and the hostel was half empty. The pain sharpened with every minute. In desperation, he reached for his phone and dialed the one number he hadn't used in weeks. Papa. Victor didn't ask questions. 90 minutes later, he burst through the clinic doors, panting, his shirt soaked in sweat, still in his overnight cleaning uniform. He had run from the BRT terminal to the school gate after jumping off a bus stuck in traffic. His shoes were mismatched, his face drawn, but his hands were steady as he gripped his son's. He stayed by Valentine's side the entire night, massaging his ankle gently, whispering comfort, refusing to leave even when the nurse suggested he get some air. Valentine watched him, barely able to speak. This man whom he'd lied about, dismissed, hidden, had still come running at the first call. No anger, no shame, just pure, unfiltered love. Something shifted inside Valentine that night, something long overdue. He began to see not just the man in front of him, but the mountain of sacrifices behind him. Back home a few days later, with his foot wrapped in bandages, Valentine lay on Victor's worn mattress, restless. The house was still. He noticed an old wooden box tucked under the bed, something he'd never seen before. Curiosity overcame him. He pulled it out and slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of documents, yellowed papers, creased and smudged. The first was a letter from a university, dated 1996. "We regret to inform you." Rejection. Then another, and another. Some were handwritten scholarship denials, internship declines, medical bills, school fee receipts with notes scribbled in the margins. At the bottom, folded carefully, were photos. Victor, in a borrowed suit, standing outside what looked like a university hall. His graduation, except there was no certificate. In his hand, just a smile too wide, eyes too tired. Valentine's throat tightened. He realized these were the remnants of a life paused, a future abandoned, piece by piece, so he could have one. Everything Victor could have been was buried in that box. Valentine sat back on the floor, the room spinning slowly around him. For the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of what his father had endured, alone, without applause, without recognition. That night, he lay awake in silence, tears slipping down his cheeks, not just from guilt, but from awe. Awe at the man who had loved him so fully that he gave up everything so his son would never have to. Graduation day arrived beneath a cloudless sky, the sun blazing over the modest stadium packed with families, friends and faculty. Banners fluttered, names were called, cheers erupted as students crossed the stage, caps bobbing, robes swaying. In the back row, Victor sat nervously, gripping a worn plastic folder that held his son's invitation, now slightly creased from the many times he'd opened it, reread it, and smiled to himself. His shirt, though ironed carefully that morning, was frayed at the collar. His shoes, dusty from his early morning cleaning shift, pinched his feet. But none of that mattered. His son was graduating. The dream he had sacrificed everything for was finally real then. Valentine's name echoed through the loudspeaker. Valentine graduating with honors in engineering. The crowd clapped, and Victor rose, clapping too, his eyes welling up. But instead of heading straight to collect his certificate, Valentine veered toward the microphone. He cleared his throat, and the room hushed. "Before I collect this certificate," he began, voice shaking but steady, "there's someone here who deserves to be honored first." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes locked onto his father's. "I know many of you see me as smart, hard-working, maybe even brilliant, but everything I am came from the man who sacrificed his life so I could have mine. A man who never got the chance to wear a robe or walk a stage because he was too busy making sure I could." Gasps rippled through the audience. Phones rose in the air. Valentine continued, voice thick with emotion. "Dad, please come up here." Victor froze. His heart pounded. He looked around, unsure if he had heard right, but all eyes were on him. Slowly, his legs trembling, he stood and made his way to the stage. The applause was soft at first, then it swelled, a wave of claps and cheers building as he climbed the steps, tears already streaming down his weathered face. When he reached his son, Valentine smiled and turned to the crowd. "You didn't get to graduate, Dad," he said, voice cracking. "So today, I'm giving you mine." He gently removed his graduation robe and placed it over Victor's shoulders. Then he took off his cap and set it on his father's head. Victor collapsed into tears, crumbling against his son's chest. Sobbing without shame, the stadium erupted. People stood, applauded. Some clutched their chests. A woman in the front row openly wept. A lecturer rushed up to hug Victor. A photographer captured the moment, the image of a tired, tear-stained man in borrowed honor, wrapped in the love of the son he had raised with his bare hands. The photo went viral that night, and for the first time in decades, Victor didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. He felt valued. He felt like he had finally graduated, not from school, but from struggle, into a moment of grace. The story spread like wildfire. Son honors janitor, father in powerful graduation speech headlined newspapers and trended across social media platforms. The video of Victor Ez weeping as his son draped him in a graduation robe was replayed on morning shows, news outlets, and even international media. Comment sections overflowed with tears, praise, and testimonials from children who had been raised by parents just like Victor, silent warriors, invisible heroes. In the weeks that followed, life began to shift. The university offered Victor a permanent position as an office assistant in the Faculty of Engineering, not as charity, but in recognition of his integrity, work ethic, and quiet contribution over the years. Faculty staff treated him with new respect. Students greeted him warmly. Some even asked for photos. Donors and well-wishers began reaching out, offering to fund Victor's adult education if he wished to complete his degree. At first, he hesitated, laughing it off, but Valentine sat him down and said, "Dad, this is your second chance. Take it." Valentine himself had internship offers from tech firms and construction companies, impressed by his academic record and poised during the speech, but he declined the out-of-state options. For the first time, he chose to stay close, not out of guilt, but love, to support his father's dreams, just as Victor had done for him all his life. In between part-time consulting jobs, Valentine started a YouTube channel, Raised by a King. His first video featured Victor, sitting humbly in a plastic chair, sharing his story, not with bitterness, but with quiet pride. The channel grew quickly, filled with stories of unsung parents, mothers who sold groundnuts to pay school fees, fathers who rode Okadas through rainstorms just to afford textbooks. The videos struck a nerve. One warm evening, father and son sat outside their small compound on two wooden stools, a plate of bread and a kara between them. The sky above Lagos was bruised with fading gold. The noise of passing danfos and distant generators hummed in the background. Victor chewed thoughtfully, then turned to his son, eyes soft. "You didn't have to do all that, son." Valentine looked at him, smiling with that quiet knowing they now shared. "I had to," he said, "because you did it for me every single day." And in that moment, under a simple sky, with no cameras, no crowd, they shared the richest feeling either had ever known, peace. Months later, in a quiet classroom filled with worn desks and the soft hum of fluorescent lights, Victor sat nervously for his first adult literacy exam. His hands trembled slightly as he filled in the answers, but determination shone in his eyes, a reflection of years of sacrifice and unyielding hope. Outside, Valentine paced back and forth, his heart pounding with anticipation. When Victor finally emerged, his face broke into a wide, triumphant smile. "I passed," he said simply, pride and relief mingling in his voice. Valentine rushed forward, wrapping his father in a strong embrace that spoke of forgiveness, admiration, and deep love. Nearby, a curious child pointed at Victor and asked, "Is that your grandpa?" Valentine laughed softly, shaking his head. "No," he replied with a warm smile, "that's my hero." And in that moment, beneath the soft glow of the afternoon sun, their journey of struggle, love, and redemption found its quiet, powerful close. Fade out.